Okay, let's unpack this. You've got the perfect resume, the skills, the experience. Well, everything. But then comes the job interview. And it's in English, your second language. Suddenly you're worried about finding the right words, maybe speaking too fast, even wondering if your body language is sending the wrong signals. Are you, without even realizing it, putting obstacles in your own path? Welcome to Daily English Practice, Listen and Speak. This time, we're doing a deep dive into mastering English specifically for job interviews. And this is tailored just for you, the non-native speaker. We've gathered a whole stack of source materials, articles, guides, research that you've provided, and, well, we're going to pull out the absolute most actionable insights.
That's right. Our goal here is really to cut through some of the common advice and get straight to the core strategies, the things that can genuinely make a difference. We want to help you feel prepared, confident, and truly showcase your abilities, not just focus on your English level.
Okay, so let's jump right in with the groundwork. A job interview. It isn't like meeting a friend for coffee, is it? It's a very specific type of professional interaction, and for many people, it's incredibly nerve-wracking, even more so, I imagine, when you're navigating it in a language you didn't grow up speaking.
Absolutely. And one theme that just came up again and again across the sources is that success often comes down to preparedness. It's not just luck or, perfect English. The material really emphasized that interviewers aren't just judging your language skills. They're trying to gauge your interest, your commitment, your fit. And probably one of the clearest signals you can send that you're a dedicated candidate, researching the company thoroughly beforehand.
Okay, but how thorough? That's always the question. What specific kind of research did the sources highlight as, like, most impactful, especially for making that strong impression?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, beyond the basics, like what does the company actually do? The sources suggested looking into their recent news, their stated values, their company culture, maybe even major challenges or opportunities they might be facing right now. Understanding these things demonstrates a much more strategic mindset. It shows you're thinking about where you might fit into their future, not just rattling off facts from their past.
hmm That goes way deeper than just glancing at their About Us page. It's showing you've done the homework and you're actually thinking critically about them.
Exactly. And tied right into that preparedness is, well, the language itself. We saw in the material just how important it is to get comfortable with common job interview vocabulary. You really don't want to be stumbling over basic terms when you should be articulating your strengths.
Right. You want your brain focused on crafting those brilliant answers, not trying to translate some industry jargon on the fly.
Precisely. And speaking of context, the sources also highlighted the significance of cultural norms in the interview setting. This was particularly stressed for a context like the US, which often has quite specific expectations around things like formality, attire, even the sort of back and forth rhythm of the conversation. Knowing these unwritten rules helps you navigate the whole interaction much more smoothly, avoids those unintentional missteps.
Okay, so foundation,
Yeah.
solid research, getting the lingo down, understanding the cultural landscape. Got it. With that said, you move into the interview itself, and the big question becomes, what do you actually say? Yeah. Let's talk about crafting effective answers. We all know the standard suspects are coming, right? Strengths and weaknesses. Why this company? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? And of course, those infamous behavioral questions, the ones starting, tell me about a time.
Oh, yes. And a crucial takeaway from the sources regarding all your responses is the value of being clear and concise. The material really warned against speaking too much or going off on tangents or just sort of rambling. It can actually be detrimental. It's not just about filling the silence, it's about communicating effectively what you say and how concisely you say it.
That makes so much sense. It's easy to think more words means more information, but you could actually just be burying your most important points. So how did the sources suggest tackling those, tell me about a time, behavioral questions without getting totally lost in the story?
This is where the STAR method really shines. And yeah, it was consistently recommended across the board in the sources. STAR, it stands for Situation, Task, Action, Result. It's a simple but honestly really powerful framework for structuring your answers to those questions. Keeps them focused and impactful.
And the sources gave some really good examples of this. Let's walk through one quickly to make it concrete. There was that example about handling an unexpected challenge at an event. Remember that one?
Mm,
The situation S was guest speaker cancels, like just hours before a big presentation. Huge gap in the schedule.
right. Stressful.
Totally. The task key was clear. Fill that slot quickly, effectively. Keep the event professional.
Okay.
The action A taken, involve thinking fast, identifying an alternative, in this case, the CEO,
And then grabbing him.
prepping him, turning his general experience into something relevant for the audience. Right then and there.
Wow, initiative.
Exactly. And the result is the CEO delivered a solid 45-minute talk. Audience was engaged. Event stayed on track. People actually loved it. It showed problem solving under pressure.
See how that structure just transforms a potentially messy story into a
Yeah.
really clear demonstration of skills like problem solving, initiative, grace under pressure. It keeps you focused on exactly the key elements the interviewer wants to hear.
It really does. It's like a mini story, but with a clear beginning, middle, and crucially, a positive outcome that highlights your capabilities. Okay, now let's talk about that classic opening. Tell me about yourself. Why do interviewers even start there, and how should you approach it?
Well, the sources emphasize this isn't just an invitation for your entire life story, thankfully. It's really your very first chance to make a tailored impression. They ask it to get a concise professional overview of who you are and, importantly, how you might fit into this specific role.
And they recommend a structure for this one too, don't they? That past, present, future formula.
Exactly. You kick off with a brief overview of your relevant background and experience, that's the past. Then you transition smoothly into your current role and maybe highlight some key accomplishments, things that are pertinent to the job you're interviewing for, that's the present. And finally, you connect all that to your future goals and explain why you're interested in this specific position at this specific company, that's the future.
So it's not just listing jobs chronologically, it's weaving a narrative that logically leads right to why you're sitting in that chair applying for this job.
Precisely. And the material stressed some key tips here. Definitely tailor it to the job description. Focus on relevant achievements, not everything you've ever done. Highlight your strengths, clearly link your experience to the role's requirements, and this is important, keep it brief. The sources ideally suggested aiming for under, say, 1 to 2 minutes.
1 to 2 minutes. Wow, okay, that requires some serious distillation.
It does, but that conciseness is really valued. Now, related to crafting answers, there's a common pitfall the sources strongly warned against, especially for non-native speakers. Memorizing answers word for word.
Oh, I can totally see how that would be tempting, though, especially if you're worried about finding the right English words under pressure. Why is memorizing such a problem?
Well, the sources explain that memorized answers often sound really unnatural, robotic even. They lack spontaneity. And worse, if the interviewer maybe phrases a question slightly differently than you practiced, or they interrupt with a follow-up.
You get thrown off.
Exactly. You can easily get flustered because you've lost your place in the script. It just kills the natural flow of a conversation.
Okay, that makes sense. So, if not memorizing, what's the recommended approach? How do you prepare without sounding like a robot?
The fix recommended across the sources is to prepare bullet points. Just the key ideas, examples, or results you want to discuss for common questions. Then practice answering those questions in different ways. Focus on hitting those bullet points, but allow yourself to use varied language each time. This builds flexibility. And the sources even reassured, it's completely okay, actually. Often preferable to pause briefly to think before answering.
Really? A pause is okay?
Absolutely. Better than rushing into a pre-programmed response. A thoughtful pause signals consideration, not incompetence.
That takes a lot of pressure off. It's about being prepared with your core points, not having a perfect script. Okay, so we've talked about the content of your message, structuring answers, but how you deliver that message is just as critical, right? Let's move beyond just the words themselves.
Definitely. And a key aspect of delivery that was highlighted was speaking pace. For non-native speakers, there can sometimes be a tendency to speak too fast, maybe out of nervousness or just wanting to get it over with. The sources really stressed finding a good medium pace. Not so slow you sound hesitant, but slow enough that you can articulate clearly and crucially minimize errors. A calm, confident pace helps ensure your message is actually understood.
And what about those little filler words, that just sneak in so easily when you're thinking on your feet?
They really do. And look, everyone uses them occasionally, but the sources pointed out that excessive use can unfortunately make you seem unsure, maybe less articulate. They kind of dilute the impact of what you're saying.
So how do you tackle them? Is it just about willpower?
Maybe partly. But the recommended strategy is usually 2 steps. First, just become acutely aware of when you use them. Recording your self-practice, which we'll talk more about, is invaluable for this. Second, actively practice replacing that filler word impulse with just a brief pause. It feels a bit weird at first, maybe even awkward.
Yeah, silence can feel long.
It can, but a short silence while you collect your thoughts actually comes across as much more professional and considered than a string of ums or C's.
That's a really practical tip. Embrace the pause instead of filling it. Okay. Now, something the sources really leaned into, especially regarding, say, U.S. interview culture, is nonverbal communication. Body language. This seems huge.
It absolutely is. Your body language is constantly sending signals, often even more powerfully than your words. The material listed several key nonverbal cues that are typically perceived positively. Maintaining a confident posture, sitting up straight, shoulders back, making steady eye contact.
Which can feel different depending on your culture, right?
That's a very important point, yes. But in many Western business contexts, like the US, it's often interpreted as honesty and confidence. Also, using appropriate hand gestures to emphasize points not wildly but naturally, and showing engagement through actions like nodding when listening, or maybe leaning slightly forward to show attentiveness. The advice was even to observe native speakers in professional settings and consciously practice mimicking some of that positive body language.
It's fascinating how much meaning gets conveyed without a single word being spoken. And speaking of two-way communication, the sources also heavily emphasize the importance of active listening skills.
Definitely. An interview isn't just a performance where you deliver your lines. It's supposed to be a conversation. And active listening, it goes way beyond just hearing the words. It's about giving your undivided attention, really trying to comprehend the interviewer's question or statement fully, and then responding thoughtfully. This can be particularly challenging, of course, if the interviewer speaks quickly or uses complex language or idioms.
So how does being a strong active listener actually benefit you directly in the interview setting? What did the sources say about the payoff?
Oh, the benefits are significant. It helps build rapport, that connection with the interviewer. It demonstrates professionalism and emotional intelligence. It ensures you fully understand what the employer is really looking for, not just what you think they asked.
Oh, why?
And that allows you to tailor your responses much more thoughtfully and accurately to their actual needs. You're not just answering, you're genuinely engaging.
So you're not just waiting impatiently for your turn to speak again, you're truly trying to understand their perspective first.
Exactly. And the sources provided a pretty comprehensive list of tips for improving active listening during the interview itself. Things like stay focused, minimize internal and external distractions, maintain that eye contact and positive body language we talked about, listen fully, like to the entire question before you even start formulating your response. Don't interrupt them. Maybe try paraphrasing or summarizing their question back to them briefly just to confirm you understood correctly. Control nervous habits like fidgeting, which can be distracting, taking brief notes if it feels appropriate and helps you focus, and generally approaching the conversation with empathy and genuine interest.
That's a lot to keep in mind.
It is, but it makes a difference. They even suggested practicing by listening to English podcasts or shows, hey, like this one, and then trying to summarize the main points afterward builds that comprehension muscle.
Which sounds exactly like what you're doing right now. Okay, so preparation done, message crafted, delivery honed, listening skills engaged. The interview is winding down. And then comes that inevitable question.
So, do you have any questions for us?
And the answer, based on everything we read in the sources, should always be
A resounding yes. The material was absolutely unanimous on this point. Never, ever say no.
why is it such a non-negotiable yes? What's the big deal?
Well, because it's really your final opportunity in that meeting to make a strong impression. Asking insightful questions demonstrates your continued interest. It shows your preparedness because you thought deeply enough about the role and the company to have questions, and it showcases your strategic thinking. Plus, it serves a crucial purpose for you, too. It's your chance to gather the information you need about the role, the team, the culture, the company, to really assess if it's the right fit for your goals.
And I imagine just having one question ready isn't quite enough just in case.
Precisely. The sources generally recommended preparing at least 4 or 5 solid questions beforehand. That way, if 1 or 2 of them get answered naturally during the course of the conversation, you still have good, thoughtful questions ready to go at the end. You're not left scrambling.
Makes total sense. What kind of questions should you avoid asking, though? Especially at this stage of the interview.
Yeah, the advice here was pretty clear, too. Generally, avoid questions that focus primarily on personal benefits right out of the gate. Things like salary details, vacation time, specific hours, especially in a first interview. It can sometimes make you seem less focused on the role and the contribution you can make. Also, steer clear of really simple yes-no questions or things you could easily find out with a quick search on their website. Shows a lack of prior research.
Right. Aim higher. So what are examples of the good questions, the ones that make you look thoughtful and genuinely engaged?
The sources offered some great examples. You could ask about company culture, like, how would you describe the team dynamic or culture here? Or management style? What's the typical management approach within this department? You could ask about the trajectory of the role. How do you envision this role evolving over the next year or two? Or about specific projects or technologies they might have mentioned earlier. Asking about major opportunities or challenges currently facing the team or the company shows strategic interest. Or even just clarifying the next steps in the hiring process is perfectly acceptable and practical.
Yeah.
These kinds of questions show you're thinking long-term, strategically, and about how you'd fit into the bigger picture.
Those are definitely questions that require the interviewer to actually think and provide some real insight, much better than, do you offer dental?
Exactly.
Okay, great practical advice there. Now, all of this, the prep, the answers, the delivery, the questions, it sounds like a lot to juggle, and nobody nails it perfectly the first time. The sources really emphasized the importance of practice, didn't they? What tools and review methods did they suggest?
Yes, this was a really key section in the material we looked at. They definitely highlighted leveraging technology for preparation. Several sources mentioned specific tools or apps designed just for this purpose, things offering features like pronunciation feedback, ways to record and rehearse your own custom answers to common questions, even mock interviews, sometimes powered by AI. Some can even give you analysis on your speech, identifying pace issues, or how often you use filler words. This kind of tech can provide objective feedback that's hard to get just practicing alone in front of a mirror.
That's fascinating, that you can get the kind of targeted, almost data-driven feedback now. And beyond the tech tools, the sources also really push for, well, the old-fashioned method of recording and reviewing your practice sessions, right? Audio or even video.
They absolutely did, and they explain why it's so powerful. Think of it like watching game tape if you're an athlete, or watching yourself in a stage rehearsal. When you review a recording of yourself practicing interview answers, you inevitably catch things you'd never notice in the moment. Unconscious body language tics, subtle shifts in your tone of voice, how often you actually say, or like. You can hear if your pace fluctuates wildly and critically. You can judge how clear and well-structured your answers actually sound to an outside listener. It's just invaluable for identifying those blind spots.
It sounds maybe a little cringy to watch yourself back, but yeah, incredibly effective for improvement. What specifically should you be looking for when you review those recordings?
Good question. Focus on your delivery first. Your body language and eye contact, if it's video, your tone of voice, your speaking pace, those filler words we talked about. Then analyze the content itself. Were your answers clear and concise? Did you effectively use frameworks like STAR where appropriate? Did you successfully tailor your tell me about yourself answer? The key is to identify specific areas where you felt strong and where you faltered or felt awkward. That way you know exactly what to focus on in your next practice session.
And as you're formulating and reviewing all these answers, the sources had a really specific piece of advice about framing things, especially when you have to discuss challenges or maybe even past failures or weaknesses.
Yes, this was critical. Employers generally don't want to just hear excuses or purely negative stories. The sources consistently advised always framing your responses, even when talking about setbacks or weaknesses, in a positive light. Emphasize what you learned from a challenge, how you grew from it, or what specific steps you took to improve or overcome it. Turning a potential negative into a demonstration of resilience, or learning agility, or proactivity that effectively sells your ability to adapt and develop. And that's what employers are truly looking for.
That's such a powerful shift in perspective. So instead of dwelling on the problem itself, you focus on the growth, the learning, the solution that came out of it.
Exactly. It's all about showcasing your capacity for learning and overcoming obstacles. For instance, instead of just saying, I don't have experience in that specific software you mentioned, you could frame it more like, while I haven't worked extensively with that exact software yet, I'm known for being a very fast learner with new technologies. I'm confident I can leverage my existing skills and mention relevant and transferable skills, like data analysis or project management, to get up to speed and master it quickly. I'm actually eager for the challenge.
Yeah, that makes you sound proactive and adaptable, not deficient or unprepared. That's brilliant. Okay, so pulling all of this together then, it seems like success in an English job interview, especially for a non-native speaker, really boils down to several key pillars. You've got laying that solid groundwork with thorough, specific preparation. Mastering how to craft clear, concise, and well-structured answers using techniques like STAR and past, present, future. Diligently honing your delivery, focusing on pace, minimizing fillers, leveraging positive nonverbal cues, preparing those insightful questions to ask at the end, and perhaps most critically, dedicating consistent time to practice and, importantly, rigorous self-review using recordings and maybe some tech tools.
Absolutely. Mastering these elements really allows your actual qualifications, your experience, your personality, the real you to shine through. They help you stand out in what's often a very competitive job market by demonstrating not just your potential, but your professionalism, your communication skills, your ability to perform effectively under pressure. It's really about presenting the best possible version of yourself, unhindered by language anxieties.
Mhm. It's about making the language a tool to showcase your value, not letting it become a barrier that accidentally hides it. So here's a final thought for you, our listener, to take away and reflect on after this deep dive. How could deliberately shifting your mindset, moving away from viewing the interview primarily as a kind of language test that you might pass or fail, and instead seeing it as a strategic conversation where you are actively showcasing your unique value and mutually assessing the fit? How could that shift fundamentally change the way you approach preparing for and participating in your next English job interview? Think about that shift. Think about how applying these insights could truly transform your experience and ultimately your results.